Welcome to Reliability Matters, a podcast for the electronic assembly industry. Each episode covers topics related to reliability, best practices, and environmentally responsible assembly techniques, with insights from experts across the electronic assembly industry. Now, here's your host, Mike Conrad.
Welcome back to another episode of the Reliability Matters podcast. I appreciate you being here, and thanks so much for your support. We just crossed over the 15,000 download mark, and like I said in an earlier broadcast, I was celebrating at 100. I never thought we'd get much past that. So I really appreciate all of your support. Thanks for all the episode suggestions and comments. I really appreciate it. It's nice to get some feedback. When you sit in front of a camera, all you see is a camera, and it's nice to know that there's people out there that are listening. Today, I'm really excited about this episode. Today, I get to talk to four of my friends and colleagues in this industry. The title of this broadcast is Meet the Press. This is the second time we've done this, where we just talk about what's going on in the industry. And there's a lot to talk about, clearly. There's some things we probably are tired of talking about and some things we'd rather talk about. And we'll try and get both of those subjects in. So let me welcome my panel today, Mike Buetow from Circuits Assembly, and I always forget the second magazine, Mike. There's two magazines that you're editor-in-chief of, Circuits Assembly and Printed Circuit Design and Fab. So welcome to the show. And of course, Phil Stoten, my friend and colleague from Scoop TV, among 1,000 other things that he does, including writing for Forbes and a bunch of other magazines. Trevor Galbraith, my great friend from Scotland. He's joining us from England today. He's the publisher of Global SMT and Production and a lot of various shows that you see online as well. And Eric Miscoll from EMS Now. I would like to think EMS stands for the Eric Miscoll Show. If it doesn't, it's been reappropriated for that. But welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for agreeing to be drafted for this episode. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Happy to be here, Mike.
And we do have a global panel today. Mike, are you in the Boston area today?
I am.
And Phil, you're down under. You're in Australia. Is it Melbourne, Australia? Is that right?
I am in lockdown under.
Lockdown under. And Trevor, you're trapped in England at the moment?
Yeah, I'm in Somerset, England.
Somerset, England. And Eric, if I remember right, you're in Florida.
No, I'm free in Texas here. So.
Oh, you're in Texas. I don't know
Yes,
why
sir.
I thought you were Florida.
No.
Oh, interesting.
Red state.
I moved you. Yes, exactly. Yeah, Texas, Florida, it's about the same. And I'm on the left coast out here in California. So we do have a national and global perspective here. So let's start talking about some of the elephants in the room and try and get those out of the way and maybe morph into a more positive subject. Let's start with supply chain issues. People say component shortages, and that's certainly part of it, but it's way more than component shortages. I know in my company, we have a manufacturing company, and our inventory levels are about 3 times what they normally are, because normally we try very hard to be just in time. We're not just in time on anything now. We're buying for the future. So if we have an opportunity to score a year's worth of a particular part, we buy a year's worth of that part. So our shelves are bursting with parts right now, just because of the challenges. We can't be guaranteed that it would be available next week, so we just buy, and we're probably part of the problem. We're hoarding parts, right? So, but you have to keep machines going out the door. So what are your takes on the global supply shortage? Is this a 3 more months and we should be out of it? Is this what's cause and effect? What's the forecast? I'll let anyone jump in.
I polled a whole bunch of people recently on LinkedIn. I did a poll. We had about 300 votes, and most people thought it was going to last all the way through to 2022. So it looks like we're in it for the long haul. It's going to take quite a long while to correct. But you're right in saying, are you part of the problem, Mike? Because that's exactly the case. What's happening is people are over-ordering, so there's substantial stock growing in the wrong places. So there's a risk of an inventory overhang at the end. But having switched from just in time to just in case Everybody is buying much more than, or ordering a lot more than they need. It's causing the EMS companies a whole bunch of problems. They've got maybe $100 products waiting for 50-cent components to go out the door. So their work in progress has gone up, their cash flow requirements gone up. Companies that should be growing are having their growth stunted because they can't get production out of the door. So they're having cash flow issues. So yeah, it's a hell of a mess that isn't going to get fixed right away. And it needs some better, more open communication between brands, EMSs, component distributors, component manufacturers, because at the moment, nobody really knows how big the problem is because people are, either ordering so far ahead or they're double ordering. So yeah, big problem. Big problem. We can, do some things with redesigns, spinning up new designs, perhaps to use other devices, but it's definitely going to be with us a good part through next year, I think.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I think Phil's right. I think this is a problem that actually started even before COVID, because in 2019 there was a situation where companies were overstocking. They were buying in and holding inventory because they couldn't get components. Things like MLCCs and things like that. The problem is of course COVID's exacerbated it. Big issue, of course, was that there was a lot of aircraft used to fly back and forward between Asia and the United States and Europe. There's not so many because of COVID, and traditionally these components used to, come in the bellies of these aircraft. That's no longer the case. So they then tried to go to the seaboard side of it, and there's a shortage of ships. It takes 2 years to build a ship. So, there's a real issue there. But then it gets even worse because we also have a labor problem. And we had a ridiculous situation just last week with 42 ships sitting off the coast of Los Angeles that couldn't dock to offload because they didn't have enough workers to do the work. And that had a knock-on effect because all these ships had containers. And there weren't enough containers then in Asia for the dockers in Asia to be able to put on, new content. So It's just a complete mess at the moment, quite frankly.
Yeah, I read an article yesterday. It's funny you brought that up about the port of LA, and they said there was about 50 container ships out there. But the interesting thing is they said it takes about 15 days to transport these big container ships from China to, any Asian port to the West Coast. And then it takes an average right now of 30 days just floating on anchor, at anchor, waiting for their turn to be unloaded. And then another 30 days before those containers make it on trucks. Just because of the labor shortage and, the backlog of work. So that's 15 days at sea, 30 days, in shallow anchor, another 30 days, after you're steaming your way back, before those things, that's what, 75 days before anything is actually on the road, and then it has to travel to wherever it's going to go to over road. It's crazy. Mike, what's your take on all this nonsense?
Well, sourcing is getting interesting, right? I mean, I'm less interested in probably pathologizing, how we got here, and it's more of interest to me is what are we going to do about it? It doesn't seem to me that the component OEMs are rushing to bring more capacity online. So whereas, and I tend to agree with Trevor that the lead time started going out pre-COVID, but the things like MLCCs and some of the crystal stuff, that's always kind of hard to come by. That's always a difficult thing. But it's more just everyday resistors and chip caps and things like that. When those times start going out, then you say, okay, there's something going on here. My take is that the effects, right? You've got this 3-year. If we go to the end of 2022, it would be the longest bull run for component shortages that we've ever had, even more than the 99, 2000, 2001 run. So, people are just putting a stake in the ground and saying end of 22, maybe, I don't know. They're kind of guessing, right? And we're all just sort of guessing there. So that's why I try to focus more on what are the actual impacts, right? So what I'm seeing is that used equipment sellers are now getting into component sourcing. And that's a weird thing, right? Because we're used to them going in and buying up factories that are going out of business, and they buy, the Metro racks and the ESD lines, and they get all the shelving and all that. And there's always parts on those, right? And what they do is they just throw all those in a dumpster. Now they're saying, shoot, I can make money off these parts. So they're getting into component reselling, and they're taking that stock room and they're basically putting it up all on Octopart. You go to Google Maps and you look at the building, you're like, that doesn't look like a factory to me. That looks kind of more like a trailer, but you can buy parts there. So the counterfeit and what's happening is the EMS guys are saying, hey, look, you know what? I got this part. I've bought racks from these guys before. I think I know where this came from. Let's build a few boards, and if it's reliable, let's run with it. And the OEMs are saying, okay. And so you're going to end up with no traceability. Lots of counterfeit parts, moving into mainstream products. I mean, that's really where the mess is going to be, right? So all this talk about wanting to know the origins of the part and being able to see everybody who's touched it and all the rest of it, that's out the window and will be for some time to come.
Yeah, I think adversity and opportunity are the same sides, are different sides of the same coin, and that applies to nefarious operations as well. The pandemic has given companies in our industry a unique advantage or opportunity. In the early days of the pandemic, when everyone switched over to making ventilators and things like that, that was clearly an opportunity. The fact that our industry was deemed essential very, very, very early on, like the next day after state shutdown, was an opportunity. But then again, opportunity is very widespread, and clearly I worked a lot with on a production side with the counterfeit conference, the SMTA counterfeit conference. And that business is alive and well right now. And the component shortage only highlights that.
So can I add one thing? And then I'm dying to hear what Eric has to say about this, because his background, I think, is just goes right into this, right? So, I mean, at least one very large distributor is at the point where they're saying, these are the parts available. What can you make with them? Right? It's like MacGyver. And so, that's going to lead to respins and whatnot. And so the trickle down, right, is that, the question becomes, will EMS companies start to push the OEMs to share the cost of parts, almost like a consignment model? And, because otherwise that's a lot of carrying costs for EMS guys, no matter how big or small they are. And even for OEMs like you, Mike, right? So you're tying up a lot of capital in parts. Now, you get to make the decision whether you're going to redesign the board or not. But the EMS guy doesn't have that option, right? It's the OEM may say, hey, look, you can't get this part, let's redesign. Now the EMS guy is stuck with a lot of material that may or may not be reusable inside their own factory. So who's responsible for that inventory when a board is inevitably respun?
That's a good point.
So let me jump in. So I generally operate from a philosophy that business is inherently rational. It's when we add the human element that life becomes confounding. And I think that proves out again with what's going on. We've touched on some of those things here, and we'll talk more, I'm sure, about this. The labor issue right now, clearly kind of, a self-imposed, issue here. What you're talking about with the supply chains too, and what people are doing in the buying, and there's a lot of people who want to just operate as kind of in a business as usual. I think there's people who just haven't gotten the message yet, and we see that in various ways. I talked to somebody in the automotive manufacturing area here recently, and he was telling me a specific example needing a MOSFET. And the one that was required was AEC-Q, right, for the automotive industry. Well, it wasn't available. The lead time was just outrageously long. That very same part is available as an industrial grade part. Same part, same manufacturer, same damn thing. Can't be used. So that's kind of a business as usual. And I'm sure there's many more stories like that, right, where people are still operating within the confines of pre-pandemic. Whereas the reality of the pandemic really needs people to kind of break out of traditional ways of doing things. So listen, I I don't do forecasting anymore. The best I hear is this is with us through 2022. I think that a lot of the machines needed to increase the component, right, to increase the supply, need to be manufactured too. Those need electronic parts too, right?
And people to build them.
You need people to build them.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot there. And, that's the human dynamic, I think, behind it, right? I think that the business, there's rational business, and we can get into that more as we move forward. But I think the EMS is doing a hell of a job right now, kind of within the confines of what they are challenged to produce, with the restrictions being put on them. And there's a lot of adjustments being done across, not just here in the U.S., but across the globe. As we talk to the CEOs of these companies, I'm nothing but impressed by, the activities of these companies.
Yeah, Mike, you brought up the MacGyver example, right? We're MacGyvering our way out of stuff. It just reminds me of that scene in Apollo 13 where one of the people in Houston, basically threw a bunch of parts on a table and said, "Okay, we have to solve their problem, and we can only use these parts because these are the only things they have up there," right? So it's like Ford and GM. They either have to keep cars on a parking lot for 3 or 4 months waiting for a board to come in, or they tailor the car to not have a certain feature or reprogram another board to perform double duty. I mean, it's a lot of creative thinking going on right now to keep the machine going. Trevor, is that what are you seeing from a European perspective with regard to labor shortages, part shortages, the MacGyvering of our way out of it? Europeans are pretty MacGyvery as well.
Yeah. A couple of things I would maybe add to the debate so far is that, unfortunately, a lot of these components are manufactured in Asia, and there is evidence that some of these Asian manufacturers are they're preferring to supply or giving favorable conditions to their Asian customers ahead of their European and US customers. So that's a concern. On the delivery and labor shortage, it's even worse in the UK than it is in the rest of the world, because one of the issues we had here recently was Brexit. And as part of the new immigration laws here, a lot of the lorry drivers that used to deliver product are no longer allowed to come into the country. And Boris Johnson's answer to this is, well, we need to teach more lorry drivers, teach more people to drive lorries. Well, that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And another consequence of that, of course, is that the trucking companies have really had to ramp up the rate of pay that they're paying these people. Mm-hmm. So it's become a lot more attractive to be a truck driver here in the UK, but it's going to take you a few months to sort of go through the learning process. So we've got that on top of all the other issues that everybody else is dealing with. So it's difficult, But I think I can't see a way out of this until, because you've got COVID in the middle of it. It depends how other countries handle the COVID crisis and get the people vaccinated, and everybody reaches a consensus and we start opening up, air pathways, that we can start doing business again, because the way it's working at the moment is just terrible. It's very difficult.
Phil, you do a lot of you have a lot of conversations, do a lot of interviews with C-level executives. One of your shows is called C-level, right? What's your take from the ivory tower standpoint, of the people that you're talking to?
I'd underline what Eric said, in that I think the CEOs of the EMS companies are doing an amazing job in a very challenging environment. One of the big challenges they've got is kind of reevaluating their relationship with the brands they work with. So trying to figure out how they can have an open and honest communication and say, look, we're all in this problem together, and if we work together, we can get through it. Because I think typically brands and EMSs have a relationship where both of them are, fighting for the same piece of margin. There's the EMS company has generally been the weaker in the negotiating position, and now everybody needs to get on side and help each other, and that's certainly a sense that I see And the companies that are probably doing better are those that have much stronger partnerships with their customers, so are able to say to them, look, open and honestly, we're in this predicament. What can we do to get out of it? And we'll work together on design, or we'll work together on something else. The other thing I've noticed, having spoken to a lot of CEOs, is that the bigger the company is, the bigger the problem is. So, your $50 million EMS seems to be doing pretty well. They're getting most of what they need because they need relatively small volumes. They're probably not in the automotive sector. They probably don't have the same traceability pressure. So they're coping better. But when you get to the large kind of $150, $200 million up companies, they're really finding it very, 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 very difficult at the moment. And it's not getting any less challenging, and they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. We do see, as I say, we see people looking to redesign as a solution. And if you've got an extra 15 weeks on your lead time, that's plenty of time to redesign a PCB for a different component. And then we're seeing other people talking about this phrase "design for disruption," because the component shortage is just the current disruption, and we're just one disruption after another at the moment, and they just seem to be getting bigger every time. So it's a reality. So the idea that when you design a product or you design a printed circuit board, you're designing it with disruption in mind. So you make sure you've got multiple sources. You make sure you've got different component options. You make sure you've got different build options in different locations, so you've got a bit more resilience in the supply chain. So we've moved from this really strong desire to be lean and do this whole just-in-time thing to doing something that is almost like the late 90s, where you just buy as much stock as you can get, and if you can get some more stock, just double order and keep going, and hope for the best. And we all know how badly that went around 2001, where there were literally billions of dollars of stock overhang of redundant parts. So there's issues there. I think there's better traceability and better visibility in the supply chain now, but there's still a lot of risk there. But yeah, I think they're doing a good job, and I see some EMS companies that are just really, are growing successfully, profitable at the moment. There's a lot of M&A activity. So, the market's pretty hot at the moment. So, if we can get through this, I think it all bodes well. I think the underlying trends are really quite positive.
Yeah, I agree. From my perspective, which is, I'm not quite in the 36,000 foot high press box view that you guys have, but from my perspective, kind of in the trenches, I think there's this whole pandemic has presented a lot of opportunity. Now that it's challenging opportunity because you have to find people to build it and parts to buy, but there is definitely a lot of opportunity right now, and I see a lot of companies with record profits at the moment, and I think part of it is they're busy. And part of it is they're not spending any money on travel, and that's a huge part of the travel budget, and that concerns me a little bit as we get out of this pandemic. Have the bean counters at these companies benefited and enjoyed the savings from travel, realizing the sky didn't fall? That they're making a lot of money, and they're not. They probably don't see any downside to it. There probably is a downside, but they don't see it. When things become safe again to, go out to the real world and act as normal, are the accountants going to say, we're not going to do those shows. We're not going to go to those conferences. We're not going to send you around the world to sign a contract and shake a hand and kiss a baby and all the things, that we travel for. I'm just wondering if the savings have now polluted the way corporations are going to look at travel and look at sales techniques, and if Zoom's going to be with us for a lot longer than we think.
I would hope that no company is going to elevate their CFO to be running everything and decisions, because the two most risk averse people in any organization are your CFO and your head HR person, right? So we need to leave those decisions to the business operations people, because managing risk is an inherent part of running a business, right? So I think people are still challenged. We were talking before we started the recording here today about the impact on shows. And I think that it's hard to do, it's easy for us to do interviews and talk to people, using this medium. It's very hard for somebody to roll out their latest whiz bang machine and get people come up and engage with prospects and kick the tires and demonstrate. That's very hard to do over this platform. So, those have to be weighed within the current environment, but hopefully that's not bean counters doing the weighing on this one, is my point. So, Mike, you were going to say something. I jumped in on you.
Yeah, I mean, once the pendulum starts going, we have this tendency to think it's always going to go in that direction. And, all we need to do is look back to 99, 2000, 2001, as Phil alluded to. And we've seen this movie before. None of this predicts the extraordinary event, right? So we think like everything's going in this direction, there's a demand and all the rest of it. But then what happens when, forgive me for saying this, but, a major terrorist event or, a war breaks out or some, major disruption in the supply chain, the typhoon hits Japan or something like that. And all of a sudden everything goes on pause, right? And then you start saying, well, okay, maybe we're not going to keep going on like that way forever. And I think the same thing's going to happen here. The people ultimately are social creatures, and they're going to want to be back out among their peers. And so the euphoria of these great balance sheets will wear off once we get another few quarters down the road, and 2020 is no longer the year that we're baselining against. And so, we're looking good right now because you're comparing it to the first recessionary quarter we'd seen in 12 years. We don't get that every year, right? We don't get that every quarter. That's going to change. I really think that the people are going to want to get back out, and that what I would call the current trend toward, hey, we can do this via Zoom and that, is really going to wear off.
Do you think there's a hybrid potential, though? Do you think it's one of those environments where people are just questioning everything and saying, when I look at the trade show calendar for this year and I talk to CMOs at electronic companies about what they did this year, what they didn't do, and what they're going to go back to, some of them have said to me, hey, I can't wait to get back to that trade show. We generate a lot of leads there. And others have said to me about other events, I'm glad we didn't have to go to that one this year because it wasn't a great show for us. So I think if shows are good, I think like you look at a Productronica, which is a super strong brand that's been around forever, it's going to have a tough show this year. There's no doubt about it, but it's going to have a show probably. And it didn't have to have a show last year, so it was very, very lucky on that basis. And the chances are in 2 years it'll bounce back pretty solidly. But you look at some of the smaller shows that people have gone to year after year and have kind of been loyal to without really knowing whether they were really good bang for buck. They're really questioning those, and whether it's the bean counter is putting pressure on the CMO or whatever it is, they're definitely questioning it, and they're definitely looking at webcasts and other things that they've done and what they've been able to generate. And I absolutely agree with you, Mike. I think with a trade show, there is a lot of fringe benefits that are beyond the measurable deliverables. I've never been to a trade show that I regretted going to, because there's always that chance meeting in the aisle, or there's that contact you come away with that becomes a friend or an important business colleague in the future. So you never know what you're going to get, and that doesn't happen in these virtual environments. But I do think people are questioning everything.
Yeah, the CFOs are going to question stuff because it's their job, but the budget managers of every department, the head of every department is already questioning that stuff, right? So, I mean, we see it at a lower level even than the CFO. and that's their job. We expect that. I guess I keep going back to, like, we'll use Productronica for example. I mean, you and I remember when 20 years ago when the fabrication halls took up almost 3 halls on their own. Now it's less than 1, right? Because it just wasn't a good show to go to for fabricators.
The PCB fab, yeah.
Right, bare board fab, and that's what happens. So there's and I've been to shows as well as all the rest of you where people say they're looking up and down the aisles and there's nobody there and they're like I'm never coming back here again, and then 12 months later, hey, here you are, because there's a gravity. Okay,
yeah.
So that's just the human nature of it, and I don't see that changing so easily.
Well,
I think the
good news.
I think the good gravity will survive, and the bad gravity might not.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the tangible, less tangible, attributes of a show, and obviously the less tangible, the measurable is the networking. I met all of you, without exception. I met all of you at shows, right?
Yeah.
We would not have crossed paths otherwise. I would have read you, I would have watched you, but we wouldn't have met if it weren't for shows. And
he's lying. I used to mow his lawn.
Well. We don't talk about that. That was the judge made you do it. That was community service, Mike. You know better. But you did learn your lesson.
He learned his lesson.
Yeah. True. He had to mow my lawn for a year, and he had to work in this industry for life. That was that's
you must have done something really bad, Mike.
We've successfully taken our audience and
do his laundry, but because the judge never ordered that.
No, he didn't commit that heinous of a crime, so he didn't have to do the laundry. We've taken our audience and put them into a funk talking about all the things I thought we were only going to talk about for 6 months last year. And, obviously it's still relevant today, but let's change the tone a little bit on the remaining time for the show and talk about everything not COVID, labor shortage, part shortage, things like that. There are exciting things going on in our industry every day. And sometimes that news is just overshadowed by the doom and gloom and the panic and, the beat the drum stuff. But I'm curious, you, in your work, in your line of work, you talk to an awful lot of companies, a lot of engineers, a lot of executives. You kind of have your ear to the track and what cool trains are coming down the track. What excites you about our industry right now? What types of innovations do you see coming our way? What companies are literally and figuratively making headlines at the moment, and share your take on the world from your unique perspective.
Okay. Well, I think one of the companies I find quite exciting at the moment is a California company called Novocentrics, which they've really come from the flexible PCB side, but they're using photonic reflow to basically cure components in milliseconds on a much smaller footprint than a traditional reflow oven, and it takes that part of the process from being the slowest part of the production line to the fastest machine on the line. So they're working on trying to get this to work in normal FR4 boards and that type of environment, and if they're successful in doing that, that's going to be a real game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen their videos and things like that. It does look very interesting. It looks very promising. It's like instant reflow, like boom, it goes from solid to liquid to solid in seconds.
Right.
Yeah, that is interesting. I know their applications are a little bit limited, as you said, right now, but if they could expand that out to more traditional reflow applications, I think they've definitely. That's a disruptive force. That's a disruptive technology if it can be rolled out to mainstream applications for sure.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing at the moment, which is really interesting, is a huge amount of really interesting innovation in terms of technology, in terms of business models, and particularly in terms of digital transformation. People looking at kind of factory operating systems and those kind of things. But at a high level, I think what's really interesting is there's a lot of VC funding going into that. There's a lot of capital around for innovation in manufacturing and innovation in supply chain, both at the kind of Series A and seed funding level, but also at the IPO and curiously at the SPAC level. So there's a lot of companies in our sector and in the manufacturing sector generally raising a lot of money. You look at the Xometry manufacturing as a service business and the SPAC that took them to the market and valued them at $3 billion. There's a Bright Machine SPAC that's on its way through that values them at something like 1.4. So there's a lot of money swashing around in the industry for the right kind of innovation, be it angel funding for seed startups or really strong Series A funding. And there have been some really successful exits for some of those funds recently. So that kind of puts some more energy into the market. So I think it's an exciting time to be innovating in the manufacturing space.
Very good. Mike or Eric, any
there's lots going on, Mike. Hydrogen fuel cells on PCBs, integrated memory solutions to meet the chiplet requirements. With electric vehicles comes some really high power boards, 48 volts and higher. Same with solar panels, which, a lot of people have them on their houses. But, you think about like the IoT stuff. Much of those boards they're the run-of-the-mill 4-layer boards, and there's a lot of that. So there's just kind of really it's bifurcated. There's the factory of the future. I know IPC and Matt Kelly over there is working very hard on that. If you look at what USI is doing over in China, it's very interesting. Where they've gone from hundreds of employees down to just a couple to run these boards. But it works very well when they have high volume SIP modules like USI is building. Very few companies have what I would say are the financial or the personnel resources at present to pull that off. The real innovation, I think, is kind of what Phil alluded to, which is how the finance guys are managing their businesses and maintaining their cash flow in the wake of this potentially disastrous component situation.
No. Listen, I agree with everything that's being said. I think the automation and the digitalization, clearly is a lot happening in that area. And on the automation, it's just, especially those back end functions, right? They're traditionally more labor intensive. But what I've really appreciated seeing and in discussions so far this year have been with again, it's on the human side. It's on the managerial, how to manage a workforce through this crisis, how they're handling that, how they're handling remote workers now. I think that's an ongoing challenge. Traditional management styles, are used to people right there within their factory they can do. All of a sudden you have people who are working remotely. You're not managing time anymore, you're managing to results. And so I think, what companies and what I've been nothing but impressed by the management staffs and personnel I've spoken to who are adapting to these new realities that'll probably be with us for years to come. And so that to me has been kind of a lesser noticed kind of, but yet very important aspect of this.
I interviewed a director of manufacturing for a mid-size contract manufacturer recently, and he was all no nonsense, ex-military guy. Just he was like Joe Friday. He was a dragnet. It's like just the facts, ma'am. But it was a fascinating interview because he completely believes and has demonstrated that when you have a high level of automation and a high level of testing, then his factory can compete with any Asian factory, any Chinese factory, Malaysian factory, Vietnamese factory, wherever, board for board. Even though some countries have, the benefit of a very low labor cost, they don't rely on as much labor here in his factory particularly. And he's got the testing down to the point, they invested millions of dollars in equipment, and particularly for a mid-size CM. And the result is, virtually zero escapes and extremely optimized factory. He even designed his factory floor, his flow, to be in a figure 8 design as opposed to more of a linear design, because in his example, he says, if you're right-handed and I put a pen on the left side of your desk, that's an inefficiency. I mean, that's the micro level of efficiency that he's going for. And his belief is North America can compete with any country if we put the resources and the technology in the right focus, and invest in that, so that labor is not the deciding factor, because technology costs just as much over there as it costs here. If you're going to buy a $200,000 Co-Young machine here, you're going to spend about that much there too, if not more. So what's your take on that? Do you think that the pandemic and a lot of recent events have brought up the subject of reshoring again, and that was kind of a louder drumbeat maybe a year ago than I hear today, but I think I still hear it. What's your take on reshoring? What's your take on North American manufacturing and its survivability into the future, and maybe does it have a chance to gain dominance again as it was 50, 60 years ago?
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick? First of all, I hate that term, and I've said this over and over. Reshoring, it's such a political term, and I know everybody loves it. It's not a strategic term, though. The strategy, the proven strategy, is regionalization, build in region for region. The reshoring is that this hope that somehow all this stuff that went to China is going to come back, and we're all going to have, happy days again here in the United States or wherever. That's simply not going to happen. What's going to happen is exactly,
I can smell the apple pie in the oven right now, Eric. I can smell it.
It's just it's exactly what your gentleman was saying. They're going to be automated facilities. That's the only way we're going to compete, right? We're not going to compete by putting thousands of people in factories and creating a Foxconn South China facility in Austin, Texas, right? These are going to be highly automated, low touch, and which means it's going to require a higher degree of technical competence for the people who are working within that. It's not going to be just bringing in a bunch of people and teaching, here, you put this on there and it slides down, and it's a higher level, and that's just the maturation of the industry and the evolution of the industry. It was inevitable, and China is starting to have that as well. The problem becomes the supply chain, right? We're still, we can do all this stuff here, but where are we getting the parts? Asia. Even if we develop all these great foundries over here and do semiconductors, where's the packaging and test going to happen? Asia, right? Where are the PCB boards being made? Asia. So, I think we need a more holistic view of this than just the factory floor and putting pieces on boards and putting parts together.
I agree with Eric that reshoring is almost a partisan term now. It's been politicized, so I get that. It's a combination of patriotism and nostalgia from days gone by, but it is a common drumbeat, at least in the United States. Mm-hmm. Trevor and Phil, in Australia and in the UK, is there a similar march and mantra toward patriotism and getting back to the good old days when cars were made in our country and electronics were made in our countries? Is that the same in Europe and down under?
Well, in the UK, we're certainly the government has put in place quite a lot of funding for high tech development, and they are pursuing a lot of high tech manufacturing and things like that. So there's lots of money around for it. In Europe, there are pockets. Every country is a little bit different. But I agree with what Eric said. I mean, I think, companies are very capable of being able to do this technically. But the issue really at the end of the day is the supply chain. And how do you take that risk out of the supply chain? And I think there has to possibly be some regionalization of getting more of the parts, more, not just the chips, but maybe more of the PCB manufacturing, more of the other supporting parts done regionally, whether that's in Eastern Europe or whether it's in Southern Mexico. I don't know, but I think there has to be, and that sort of initiative really has to be government driven, that's the way I see it.
It's curious, isn't it? First of all, I'd say that down under, very little manufacturing. Proximity to China means that we buy just about it. Australia buys just about everything from Asia. It's pretty much in the same time zone. I only have one client in Australia, and they have a rare earths mine in Tennessee. So my experience of the Australian manufacturing industry is somewhat limited. But every government in the world wants to use manufacturing as part of its recovery. So every government in the world is singing from the same songbook. There's the same mantra. A lot of them believe that automation is a key to, if they don't have low costs, they believe that automation is their key to leveling the playing field. It's the key to better quality. And, as you say, Mike, reliability matters. So getting better quality is an important part of it. So I do think there's an opportunity with innovation. It requires a huge amount of investment, and that can result in a more regionalized manufacturing ecosystem, which I actually think is a great thing. Shorter supply chains are just better for the environment. The fact that there aren't all these planes flying around and all these ships full of goods moving around the world is actually great for sustainability. And if we can get back to much shorter supply chains and still get the products we want, and maybe we'll have to pay a little bit more for them, but I think perhaps we're going to have to live with that. And I think that would be a great thing. But don't think that the US has thought of this and nobody else has. Everybody else has thought of it. The US talked about putting I think they talked about putting something like 20 billion or so into semiconductor. And in the same week, I think South Korea had announced about 5 times that going into their semiconductor industry. So it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same everywhere. And I don't believe the US is ahead of the rest of the world in terms of factory automation. And to be honest, I think probably China is one of the countries that's investing a lot in automation, a lot in factory autonomy, a lot in AI-driven factory automation, and has a lot more graduate engineers, a lot more skills that Eric was alluding to that are going to be appropriate for those factories of the future. So I think it's really challenging. I think what is ideal is to have consumers that want to buy products that are made closer to them, and companies that want to manufacture using shorter supply chains. And if we can do that, we get a regionalized model where the US maybe makes for the US with the help of Mexico and Canada maybe, or Costa Rica or wherever else. Europe has some low-cost manufacturing in Eastern Europe, and it has some very, very high-tech manufacturing in Germany and Switzerland that is very economic, particularly at the high reliability, high quality, very demanding product end of the market. And Asia will do the same. And Asia's benefited because it does have that low-cost labor force, but low-cost labor is what they use to kick the door in. They've kept that door open with logistics and awesome supply chain and ridiculously long-term commitment to their industrial policy, which you can do if you don't have elections.
Yeah, right. Mike, do you agree with Eric's take on, let's dump the word reshoring?
It's going to be a little bit of a hot mess of an answer, but the technology always progresses. Okay, so automation, even in low-cost areas, always wins out. When I first started going to China more than 20 years ago, the Chinese government liked the term semi-automated. They didn't like the term automated because they felt semi-automated meant workers, it meant jobs. But go find the factory of any size or note in Southeast Asia or China that's building things without a pick and place machine, where they're assembling everything, components on hand and hand soldering. I mean, they don't do that, right? So even if it's low cost, they're still automated. I'll use this analogy. This past summer, I took my family out to Illinois. And so it's the first plane ride that we've all taken since COVID. and we had a car rented in advance because we knew that they were scarce. And Chicago O'Hare Airport has a dedicated car rental terminal. And there's probably 20 or so different car rental companies there. Only one had a self-serve user kiosk. Everyone else still required the customers to use the counter. So we waited in line forever just to get our car. Totally unnecessary. Companies should be looking really, really hard, no matter where they're at ways to make their customer experience faster and easier. And that's really true in our industry. But for the most part, we aren't. So, that's going to make it easier for the guys who want to disrupt this industry to do so. And if you look at the history of disruption, it almost always comes from outside the industry. So we talked a little bit way back about, printed electronics and things like that, and, the micro factory really. And, I'm not saying that that's going to be the answer to everything. It's certainly not. But there will be somebody that comes along and says, wow, these guys are doing things so you would never draw this up on paper today. If you had these resources and these problems and these, this amount of money. This is the largest industry in the world is electronics manufacturing. So instead of trying to turn the airship, the aircraft carrier, we're just going to, create some whole totally different vehicle. And somebody's going to come along and do what Uber did to the taxi industry. And lo and behold, the rest of us are going to be like, damn, I wish I thought of that.
Yeah. Very good.
The downside to automation, as you're talking about it, Mike, of course, is what do we do with all these people who used to have those jobs that automation is replaced. So I guess, we better figure that out, or we got to bring back war and pestilence to kind of manage a growing.
What people? I mean, what people, right? The U.S., we've always in this industry had a labor shortage. Yeah. We've never been able to find, even when, in 2007, 2008, in the recession, we never could find enough of the right people to do the jobs that we needed them to do. There's a mismatch in the U.S., and I'm presuming in Europe as well, between the skills that are needed by engineering and industrial manufacturers and what high schools and colleges produce in terms of work-ready labor.
Yeah.
And that doesn't exist in the same way in Asia.
Yeah. By the way, I was talking about the labor force, even at a McDonald's, right? You go in, these are entry-level things. It's all kiosks now, right? So we're moving all those.
What about the guys at the car rental desk?
Yeah, the guys at the car rental desk who had a job, and that was now he's being replaced by a kiosk. That's what I was referring to, is those things where automation is becoming so prevalent in everything. So
yeah,
I'd like to replace that guy at the car rental desk with a kiosk. Even better, I'd like to just have the app, I don't know why everybody doesn't do what Hertz does, right? You just, you land, they know that you've landed, you get the boop, I'm here, my car's waiting in stall number 52 or whatever, and you go right to it. And there's no reason why, but that's just a better customer experience, right? That's where we have to get as an industry as well. I'm not saying I have the answer as to how we get there, but it's got to be that plug and play, that predictive and user friendly.
Real quick, we have to wrap up very quickly, but
let's keep going.
Let's keep going. Well, we don't have to wrap up. I mean, we can go forever, right?
Come on, it's like midnight Phil's time.
I'm sure all of our. I know it's 2 a.m. It's after 2 a.m. for Phil, right?
It's already Saturday morning.
Yeah,
it's the weekend.
It's the weekend. What are you complaining about, right?
I love coffee off early at the weekend.
But we won't have time to go down this rabbit hole too deeply. But I think that U.S. I'll speak for the U.S. I think every other country can do this too. I think we need to recalculate the education model in most countries, that we put so much emphasis on a 4-year degree or more. We're putting kids $200,000 in debt, and then they get entry-level engineer jobs, for not enough money to cover that debt. I think we need way more trade skills in this country, technician level skills, which may not require a 4-year degree and $200,000 in education expenses. I think we need to train plumbers and carpenters and technicians of various sorts at trade schools. You can do a 1-year trade school, get a job as a journeyman plumber, and start off at $60,000 a year, and maybe open your own business, or maybe come into the workforce running equipment on a EMS production line, without having to be an MBA or a PhD. I think we're losing a lot of our potential workforce for decent, well-paying jobs, in the chase for this magic, C-level spot. And not everyone's going to be in, the boardroom is pretty small compared to the rest of the workflow. The ratio is tremendous. And, we need cooks, we need chefs, we need, busboys, we need bartenders, probably more bartenders, but we need all that in our industry, figuratively speaking. And I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, trying to get a tradesman here at the moment is impossible. They are booked up months in advance. You're literally having to make an appointment to get an electrician to come and see you in 6 weeks' time. It's ridiculous. And it's because every society needs, an infrastructure of plumbers, carpenters, etc., electricians, and they're all going to, to college to get an ology. Which is another point. I mean, some of these people are going to college to take up degree courses that are absolutely useless. So there should be better guidance given to some of these kids, because they come out with a pile of debt and no job to help repay it. So there's definitely a rethink needed.
Yeah, I would say the added benefit of getting more kids out of universities, at least in the United States, is to minimize their exposure to all these asinine ideas that have come out of academia.
Here we go. We open the door.
That are all causing social problems across this country. Don't get me going, but that would be certainly an added benefit to all of this is exposure to people who've never done something in their lives, but, reside in academia and think, so, but other than that, I think what you're saying, listen, this country, just like what Trevor was saying before about the lorry drivers in the UK, we have a hard part in this country, right? Truck drivers, we need thousands of them, right? Meanwhile, there's a self-imposed problem that the government, we're paying people. It's more lucrative to stay home, right? Plus, we have the moratorium on the mortgage payment and the rental payment and stuff. So it's very hard. I mean, there's a lot of jobs here that need to be filled, and it's self-imposed stupidity by the government level with all these plans, well-intentioned, I'm sure, that are resulting in these problems that they're going to need to work out of. So,
well, it's long been said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah. Sure. Yep.
Mike, any take on that? The educational front?
Business can't complain that government is the problem and then look to government for a solution. Okay, there's just, that doesn't work, right? That's incongruous. Second is that there's always some tension between what businesses and industries, which are, changing, want from high school or college graduates, and what the high school and college graduates themselves, or the students really, know about themselves. I mean, we all have kids. I think all of your kids are grown, like out of college, if I'm correct. My oldest one just started, right? So, he's 18 and he's got some vague notion of what he might want to do, but there's no way that out of high school he could have just simply gone into the workforce. He doesn't have the ability or the skills, and he doesn't really even know what he wants to do. So to consign yourself at an early age, when you still are trying to figure out who you are and what you're interested in, to a particular industry or particular job function might be premature. However, everybody is right in when they're describing a world where there's more emphasis placed on ideas, or thinking for the sake of thinking, as opposed to developing true analytical skills, because it's the latter that people need to come out of college with. So it's one thing to know, everything there is to know about Chaucer, right? But, that don't build an iPhone, and yet Apple hires lots of English majors. Because the folks, they figure out where they can put them, right? And they need the bodies, but you still need to have people that have good analytical skills. And the programs of colleges that stress that, I think, are the ones that are more in line with tomorrow's labor force, really even today's labor force.
Interesting.
Maybe we should do the same as Switzerland and have 2-year conscription after high school. You know, then you grow up fast, and then you have a better idea of what you want to do with your life.
Yeah, go to Israel, just go on a kibbutz and
Right?
Same thing. You know, go and discover yourself.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, right?
So
What do they call that in Australia, Phil? A walk around? What is that?
Yeah, right?
Walkabout. You go on walkabout.
Walkabout.
Yeah, you just wander off. You just wander off into the bush, and you come back when you feel like it. Maybe in a year, maybe not at all. There's a lot of stuff out there that'll kill you. So
a baby took my dingo. Oh, no, dingo took my baby. So
Bill, Eric, a walk around is what I do at my house every day, trying to find my damn phone. Because it's here.
do you know how many times a day my wife will go, I lost my phone. Can you call it? Most of my phone calls, if I went through the history, it's all calling my wife at home, from home. Yeah. You know, oh, there it is. Yeah, there it is. Or we get in the car. Oh, I think I left my phone. I can't find it in my purse. Call it. There it is.
Yeah. I hope she's not a fan of the show, Mike, for your benefit.
Oh, well, clearly not. Clearly not. Yeah, clearly not. Okay, last question. Last question. We're all, smart sages now. We've all gone through, a historic pandemic and all the different side effects of it. What have we learned? What lessons have we learned? If you were in charge of the economy, if you were the president of your country or the prime minister of your country, knowing what we know now, armchair quarterbacking completely, what changes would we have made? Or would we have done exactly what we have done? What have we learned? This is a chance to redo history.
Yeah. So, my sense is that whatever lessons we learned, we are going to revert in short order to the prior our prior process, right? Like, for example, right now companies are placing orders 12 months out. So the EMS guys have a window that they've never had before. They've got great visibility. We're going to lose that, once this is all kind of blown over. And the lessons that we should have learned, I think, are going to be fleeting. So what I think should happen is OEMs, and sorry for, I'm going to offend some people here, but OEMs should look harder at bringing assembly back in-house. I think they have to. And the idea that manufacturing companies will happily share all the access to their internal systems with outside customers and vendors, that's only going to last until the first well-publicized hack. So, this window into the factory and vice versa, and you can see down to the line level and the component level and all the rest of that stuff is only going to work until, some bad actor, whether it's, I'm not going to name countries, but we know who they are, or just, some other competitive company decides.
Let's put them in alphabetical order. Let's start with C.
Yeah, right. They're going to figure out who's building for whom, and it's not that hard to know that, and they're going to break into that assembler system. And then from there, they're going to have all the information that they need to duplicate the product or just wreak havoc all over the assembly line. And there's no reason they couldn't do that to the fabricator as well, but they'd learn less because they wouldn't have access to the BOM and things like that. So, I truly think, this is my wild ass guess, but I truly think that OEMs are going to wake up and realize that, forget the manufacturing flow advantage for a moment where they can go from design to assembly, more seamlessly because they're all on the same relative roof. But just for the sake of supply chain management and for IP security, they are often better off building in-house. And, Apple kind of sort of already does this, right? Its Foxconn plants aren't technically Apple plants, but they may as well be. And we're already kind of seeing this work in the other direction on the grandest scale of all. I mean, Foxconn is becoming more like an OEM every day. So, if anybody can get that aircraft carrier to turn, if any single company can do it, that's Foxconn.
I did find a good tagline to advertise the show. Mike Buetow's wild ass guess. That's to quote you. That's it. We've got it. How about you, Trevor? What's your take on?
Oh gosh, my takeaway from the pandemic is it's probably not going to be very popular, but I would think that we need to get a better handle on the track tracing control apps. so that next time round we don't have to go through all the lockdowns and ridiculous things that we've had to go through and the disruption to business. Because there's nothing surer. This is going to happen again sometime, and it might be a lot more virulent the next time round. So I honestly think the way that Taiwan did it was I think the best model that I saw. And we should get ahead of the game and be ready for it next time.
Eric, you're the king of the world right now. What do you do differently?
Well, first of all, I do think Canada is offended that you wanted to stay at the start at the C's there. So with your ranking of countries, I
that's a good point. Well, let's just eliminate Canada from my thought process. They're clearly not anywhere near the top of that list.
So I'll take a little different angle on this kind of. I think especially, and I'll speak mostly for business in the United States, the prominence of kind of the shareholder model and that rose to prominence here, I think has been kind of started to be questioned over the last few years anyway. And there's a return to kind of the whole stakeholder idea where it's, stakeholders, all of them, right? Stakeholders are customers, suppliers, employees, investors, hell, even the communities in which these companies operate, right? They're all stakeholders in the success of that business. Years ago, and maybe we have Milton Friedman to thank for this, the whole shareholder theory rose in prominence, right? Everything that a company does has to be for the benefit of those shareholders, of those owners, primarily. And that impacted a lot of things that, frankly, that we've touched on here today. The ability to invest in new equipment in your own company is impacted. Those decisions, at least, that decision-making process. How you're hiring, right? How you're rewarding people, all of those things become. So I see an outcome of this, I think, as a much needed kind of return to more of a stakeholder where we're looking at a more balanced view of the business rather than just, everything's for the benefit of the shareholders. I know Wall Street loves that, but I think the outcome of this pandemic is that it's going to be much more holistic moving forward.
Phil.
I think CEOs have had to take that stakeholder approach, Eric, so you're absolutely right there. Completely agree with Trevor on the thing of track and trace, and that kind of leads me to my conclusion that I regularly have, which is, whilst technology is often the problem, I think it can definitely be the solution. So having more visibility into the supply chain through technology, having more visibility into managing things like the COVID outbreak with technology. And it's been fascinating to see the way countries have approached it. We're in a very unique situation here in Australia where we're only just getting to around about 1,000 deaths for the whole pandemic, which is a very low number, but we can't go more than 10 kilometers from our home and we're in lockdown because our vaccination rates are low. And our vaccination rates are low because not many people have had COVID. So there hasn't been any urgency there. So right now we're trading with governments around the world. We just got 4 million doses of Pfizer from the UK. Thank you, Trevor, for sending those over. We appreciate that. We got 1 million from Singapore. We got a whole lot from Poland that they didn't need. We're going to give them back when they're ready for their third or fourth booster. So that's kind of resolving that. And it's been fascinating to see the way different governments deal with it. But, I always go to this. I wrote a piece ages ago that was digital transformation is the answer. Now what's the question? And I still firmly believe that we can solve a whole bunch of this stuff with much, much better visibility into the supply chain. And I think that would help with the current crisis and the potential crisis we're going to have in 18 months' time when we've all got 4 times as much inventory as we need. I think it's been fascinating to see the whole thing play out. It's been fascinating to see what people can manage with and can't manage with. I miss trade shows, and I quite look forward to possibly being at Apex. But I miss my kids more, so I'm much more keen to fly to London to see my son or Barcelona to see my daughter. And what the hell with the trade shows? I'm not so bothered about those. So
absolutely, same here. I'm missing my grandkids that are in the States.
Yeah. So it's much more about people. It's much more about stakeholders, Eric. Not shareholders. You're damn right.
Well, great insight, gentlemen. I really appreciate this conversation. I look forward to this. We'll have to make this a quarterly event. I think we did this about 6 months ago or so. So maybe first quarter of 2022, maybe let SMT AI and PCB West and Apex and Prototronica be in our rearview mirror, and then we can talk again and we can see what the state of the industry is, and if we're hopefully a few more container ships have been unloaded by then, and we'll see where our industry is. I really appreciate your insight and all that you guys do to keep our customers, our mutual customers and colleagues in this industry informed. I appreciate the work Trevor does with all the video interviews, and of course Phil and Eric doing the same type of thing, slightly different subjects, but I appreciate all that information coming out, and Mike's PCB chat, and that high level of editorial integrity that keeps the magazine very technical, and all of that. So I appreciate all that you guys do and the contributions you make in this industry, and the knowledge that you have and the insight that you have. It's very impressive, and our industry is better off with you guys in this industry than it would be without it. So you can't go anywhere. It's a life sentence, as we talked about earlier. Yeah, exactly.
We appreciate you too, Mike.
All right. Well, thanks.
Yes, we appreciate what you do too. We think you do a great job, actually. I do at least. Yeah.
It's only a great job because I have great guests. Otherwise, I'm just the stooge that asks the questions. But I appreciate the smart answers that I get. So thanks, everyone, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, and sweet dreams, Phil.
Thank you.
Bye.
Night, guys.
Thanks for listening or watching the Reliability Matters podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and so many more. Also, be sure to check out my other podcasts, including the Concept to Creation podcast, where I feature conversations with entrepreneurs within the electronic assembly space, and the Innovations in Technology podcast, where we discuss innovative products within our industry. All three shows are also available in video format. Check out the Reliability Matters or Concept to Creation or Innovations in Technology podcasts on YouTube. Just search the show's name and you can find all three shows. Or go to mikeconrad.com. That's Conrad with a K. All three shows also appear there. Again, thanks for being part of my podcast family. I appreciate you being here. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay happy. And of course, keep doing it right. See you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Reliability Matters podcast. Join us on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month for new episodes of Reliability Matters.